I apologize if I step away for a second. My dogs have decided to start wrestling.
That's all right. That's, it's that time of day for them. So welcome. We're just talking about teacher credibility in the virtual environment. This is a very informal discussion to wrap up our study of the distance learning playbook. We've got a Jamboard going on here. And I just want to make sure, let me put the Jamboard right there in the chat for anyone who may be watching this in recording.
Now I think you should share your screen if you're recording so that people can see the Jamboard on the recording.
Okay. Nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry. Jeez, I almost hit the wrong button and ended the meeting. I did that last week, I think 10 times. I meant to switch screens, and instead what I did was I clicked a button and left the meeting altogether. Sometimes in the middle of a sentence. I mean, it was ridiculous.
But if you're the host, that cancels the meeting, right?
Yes. That is the real problem.
You need some credibility, Morgan, I think.
That's it. That gotta build up my technical credibility.
Yeah, I think there's these different levels of trust. There's trust, like personal trust and developing relationships with the kids, especially in this weird time when we're in different places, but also trust that I can still get the show on the road, even though we're on Zoom. And if kids are if kids are talking to each other, if kids are, like messaging each other in the chat while I'm trying to teach my lesson, I've got credibility because I've busted a bunch of kids doing that. So there's that kind of credibility too.
That's great.
And I'm going to keep us on track, even if we joke and, talk about our pets and do all those kind of things, that the intimacy of Zoom into people's homes allows you to do. We can still learn something.
So credibility has a lot to do with building relationship. What threatens that? Have you had any experiences where the relationship has been compromised? Like, how do you avoid that? What kinds of things would do that?
Are we still focusing on in a virtual environment?
Yeah. Because I remind you, I'm not having that experience with students. I'm having that experience with you.
Morgan, can you restate your question again?
Well, we're talking about the factors when you're building trust, how you're building trust with the students. I'm wondering if there's also something that you shouldn't do. Is there something that can compromise the trust that you build with a student? What's something you want to avoid that would seriously compromise teacher credibility where trust is the foundation?
Well, I have found that there's one student who she wants to be too casual and she wants me to be really casual with her. Like I'll get casual to bring her back, but she'll always pull me away. And I was sharing my screen for something, and then I didn't realize that I had clicked off of our lesson, and she was just like looking on my screen for just to see what was open, and she was asking me about the tabs, like what's that and what's that, and some of it was like, whoops, I don't want her to see this. And she was trying to suck me into more casual relationship because they think she's lonely and all that, but it was just inappropriate.
Right.
And so I've had to pull her back without alienating her.
I've had that experience in the classroom. I mean, where I had a student come in to talk to me during lunchtime, and she actually picked up my sandwich and took a bite of it. It was like,
Oh,
I know, very like, ooh, hard. So, but then I realized like she was trying to act with me like she did with her friends. It's like, that is not a good thing to do. So it's interesting to see how someone could do that virtually. And I bet you're right. I bet she was terribly lonely. We're learning more and more about kids really feeling lonely, especially if they're doing a lot of the virtual learning and they're really isolated.
I know one thing for me that I see with my high school students is a fine line of trying to facilitate discussion among them, but also respecting their privacy. So I'll use Google Meets. So we have the chat box. I also use GoGuardian. So I watch their screens individually and they can chat to me individually. So I try to always say, you know, Joey said this, Sally said this, but if they decide, if they choose to chat with me, to share their knowledge through the GoGuardian, which is more private, I typically, I try not to share their name because that I find is their way of trying to be part of the conversation, but they don't feel ready. They're not comfortable with everyone maybe knowing what they said. So I find that it's a kind of a line to walk where I want them to talk, but I also want to respect their privacy if they're not, you know, ready. It is a very different setting this year.
Yeah, definitely. Someone wrote a note about organization. Can you expound on that? Tell us what you mean about organization and clarity, teacher credibility, rather.
Well, that was me. And I think that what I'm hearing from kids is that they are pretty frustrated with online courses that are not organized. It's hard to find things. And so I think that when your virtual space, not just Zoom, but your online classroom, through your learning management system, when that is not organized in a clear way for the kids, that takes away some of your teacher credibility. And that too is connected with clarity. Like when it's organized, it's more clear to them. And I think that builds the credibility, especially when you communicate where you're going and why you're doing what you're doing.
I feel like the learning management system that you have and it is clear. Do you have one learning management system for the whole school, or are teachers allowed to use different platforms?
At my school, all the teachers are using the same platform.
That makes such a difference.
And we have been. But there is still disorganization, and that I think that takes away from teacher credibility.
Yeah.
Last spring, when we went remote, different teams developed different things. But this year, when we came back and started in September, everybody uses Google Classroom, or it's strongly recommended, and uses it in the same manner, because a lot of complaints came through about all the notifications and it was just like jamming up inboxes. And so they said, okay, look, let's do it this way. And there are still a few that use some different things. But like I know at our lower school, almost everybody uses Seesaw at K2, you know, so that it's common. But at the middle school, we all use Google Classroom.
Particularly for this year, getting everyone to use the same system was really important to reduce the cognitive load on the kids. So I think that's really valuable when schools and or just teams or teachers do use that same system. It's even more valuable when they use it in similar ways, but that's harder at bigger schools.
Takes a little more PD. Listen, let me tell you, using the same platform reduces the cognitive load on the families.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important. Like my daughter has 5 children in 3 different schools. And even in their high school, where she had 2 students, each individual teacher was using different platforms, different systems. And so across the 5 kids, my daughter, she had to learn so many different systems of communication and navigating. And like, she was surprised one day when she got a notice from a teacher that said, your son's science grade is 14. And she said, what? I've seen him do every single assignment. Well, she actually went into school, threw a fit, went into school, and they found out that all of his assignments were done on time and stuck. That he had missed how in this particular class to actually submit the assignments, so the teacher wasn't seeing any of them. And that was enormously frustrating. And the kid was just so discouraged. He was ready to quit school altogether because everything was all over the place and nobody could seem to sort it out. And so they sat down together and came up with a plan, and he got some support for navigating. And I thought, how many parents wouldn't go to all that trouble? If we have kids who are ghosting us, kids that we can't find, I wonder if it's that overall feeling like we don't know what's going on at home and how many kids are there and how much capacity do the parents have to learn all these different platforms. So I really do think that that's one of the things we have to keep in mind, maybe across your school district. So I'm really interested in the next couple of topics, and I want to move us to the next page, because I think what we've discussed here about teacher credibility lends itself to the next 2 topics. We're thinking about what happens after emergency learning, what happens after this state of emergency when we're no longer in this situation. So think about this specifically. What have you experienced in the last year that you find actually benefits students, and how can you carry this forward into the future, whatever that may be? And when I say the future, I mean after the state of emergency is lifted. I think last spring, when a lot of schools decided to go pass fail of the 4th quarter, that was a brilliant move on so many levels. I think this comment on the bottom of the page about finding time to connect with each student, but not just about academics. We do that in the classroom. It just sort of happens, you have a study hall, a kid, starts chatting. I mean, Lord, the things I've learned about kids. But how do you do that in this environment? Colleagues too. You're singing my song here, going deep, not wide, not grading everything, giving students choice, being intentional and structured, having a structure and a flow for students to follow and to understand. This is what leads to some choices. And I think there's always a need to let students interact with each other. There are just certain times when they've got to be social, even if it's in the classroom. So if you can, find those ways to let them connect even in the virtual environment. Has anybody this year given students a chance to choose their own path for demonstrating their learning and had them create something that just made you go, whoa? Something students did on their own that really surprised you.
I know for me, in chemistry, I found that if I give them a test, they could just be cheating their way through it. It wasn't authentic learning. So I had them use a program called CoSpaces and create a virtual world about different atoms. And the work that they did, they learned coding in doing it, as well as show their knowledge of the content. They enjoyed it. And the stuff they made is really awesome. We're actually making a website that I'm going to use to teach my classes next year is the plan. And kids really enjoyed it and felt like it was meaningful.
That's awesome. I know my church this year has been working with kids, I think like 4th through 8th grade, to create a Minecraft world. And they have, you know, it's a faith-based kind of Minecraft world, but it's mind-boggling to see what the kids come up with, how they take the lessons they learn, and they have, like, each week they'll have a guest lecturer giving them some history lesson, and then they represent it in their Minecraft world. You know, what do you build, what character? It's just amazing to me how they carry that learning into this very different kind of application. Listen, I see a note here, teaching students strategies to help them use technology to stay organized. I think maybe more than students could use, you know, that support. Is there anything you've experienced that benefits students that you think would be particularly challenging to take into the traditional brick and mortar classroom? If you go back to, that's it, it's all brick and mortar. Is there something that would be really hard to do, but that you have seen as a benefit? I think that big question, letting some students be remote, that's what's coming out of this. You know, is it better? Do some students thrive maybe coming to school part-time, you know, doing a different schedule? Some students are thriving with that kind of a situation.
Speaking to the schedule and how I've aligned deadlines, because I'm trying to help them manage their own workload. Deadlines are still really important this year, even if they don't meet them all the time. One of the things I've been really struggling with is how might this look if I am meeting with them 5 days a week again? Right now it's 2 days a week in person. I have a lot of by midnight tonight deadlines, and that allows me to do work on their off day. But if I'm teaching them at 7 the next morning, that late night deadline, which they really love right now, I don't think that would work very well, nor would it be maybe necessary if they were back on a better sleep schedule. So there are some things that are more the logistical pieces, but there are some things, for instance, my school has looked at the schedule that we took on, which was block scheduling, and we're going to carry that forward next year because we realize our students need it. It works better for all, and it was just the right time to make a change like that. So sometimes being in this situation has allowed us to make changes that probably wouldn't have been so popular at another time.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are a lot of things that have come up that we wouldn't even have allowed enter our conversation in the past that now we can talk about, think about, see, for sure. So with these ideas, I want to move us to the third page. what has benefited teachers, and what do you want to make sure gets carried forward? Okay, there's got to be something.
Oh, no, I got something.
I'm going to tell you, you know, for me, not traveling around the state and being in a room with you and doing the live events as I have, that's a tough one. That's a tough one for sure. But I feel like doing these virtual sessions and having the different types of conversations, I've gotten to know a lot more people. I hope that when we can go back out and I can do regional events again, that more people will come because they have a better idea of what's going on. I feel like I've built more relationships because, you know, we see where we live, we know what our families are doing. Many of us have gotten to know our pets' names. Prioritizing self-care. There's one that I think didn't even enter the conversation of teachers until this past year. Seriously, how, you know, it was given, I think, a lot of lip service, but I don't think it was given a lot of energy. I think that question of why do you do what you do, that's a big one. Letting go. Let go of what isn't needed. So I feel like from some of these comments, maybe there's been a little bit more, as much as it takes a lot out of us to do, you know, these really mixed up schedules and having to think about what day and what time of day and all of that, it seems like there maybe is a little more time built in for teacher time. Am I that true?
Morgan, you're going to type these up for us, right?
I'm just going to leave this open.
Okay.
I'm going to leave this Jamboard wide open for us, and even people visiting later can add more ideas. So from my perspective, every once in a while, you know, like the team will get these messages like, oh, teachers don't want this, teachers aren't willing to do that. And almost always I find there's a big exception that that's not true. Like we were told that teachers wouldn't really be willing to participate in PD this year. And while it has been an incredible challenge to try and plan the right times, I'm finding, just like you here today, there is energy and enthusiasm for continued learning.
That's because it's been a necessity.
Yes, yes. How many people, Patty, do you think really recognize that necessity? Because I think it's always a necessity.
Yeah, but we were all pushed out of our comfort zones this past year. And there was so much we needed to learn because we hadn't done it before. I guess we get a little complacent. Got a little complacent prior to that, and thought we knew we were comfortable with what we did, and occasionally got to learn new things. But I think everyone was forced to learn new things in the last year.
So, big pink note, to be more flexible. I think that's been the theme of the past years. You got to be flexible. If you're not flexible, you're going to break. And maybe we have found some new ways to be flexible. More contact with parents for sure. Less is more, let go, clean house, absolutely. I keep coming back to Patty's brilliant article, focus, purpose, and letting go, knowing when it's time to let go.
I had to keep coming back to that idea this year too, multiple times. And thank you, Morgan.
One time I was trying to get my workspace cleaned out, and a lovely woman on the floor came over and she said, "Why don't I help you for 1 hour? We'll work together." And her point was, when someone else asks you, what do you actually do with this? How useful is this? Do you really need this? And you have to look another person in the eye and explain it. You sometimes find a value that you wouldn't let yourself. There's something in your heart, you're going, no, but I really like that. I mean, I could. So you hold on to it. And when you have to explain it to someone else, it goes. That's really helpful. I had a dear friend helping me when I had to move my mother out of her home and into a room. And so having someone else ask that question is really helpful. I wonder if we could find a way to do a little bit of teaming up to take a look. We always take a look at our curriculum within the context of our own school or our own team, our own department. But I wonder how helpful it would be to team up with someone from outside your district who's familiar with your grade level and just sort of walk through, do I need this? How important is this? Is this valuable? Keep or go. Is it keep, trash, or recycle? How many of you have looked at or studied in any way the updated, revised Maine ELA standards?
I was just going to mention that, Morgan. I've been saying since they came out, I've been saying to my ELA groups, hey, at some point, why don't we look at that? It's different. There's some new things. And they were all like, not now. I can't, I can't take on one more thing. It was like, that kind of, it wasn't pushback. It was rejection. It was outright rejection. Like, no, la, I don't want. And so, I just left it there. I left it. And now the teacher leaders discovered it, like it's theirs. And they realized, oh, it's not telling us to do all these things, like all these million things, and do it for literature and do it for information. Like they realized that it's more, use your discretion. Yeah. And now they want to talk about it at the next meeting. So,
It only took 1 year. I just want to go back 1 year. 1 year ago, right now, it was right after the legislature had approved. It was like, it's going to the governor's desk. She's going to say, yes, she signed it. All right. That gave us the green light to go ahead and launch. And we had stuff staged. We're like, yes, let's go. And we had our contracts out. We were going to go to Jeff's Catering. We were going to go to St. Joe's. We were going to have days in the summer to set, and then everything went away. It's like all in a matter of 2 weeks, we went from yeah to oh my God, are you kidding me? So we're trying to go back and pick up there and still getting a sense of, I wonder in August if we could do anything, like live and in person. I don't know. But it's well worth it. When I look at these things that you're talking about, letting go and being purposeful and intentional and structured and, giving kids choices, that a lot of that is what the revision to the ELA standards was really about. It's really what it was intended to do. So if you haven't looked, I'm going to stop sharing this screen because I'm going to go someplace else for just a moment, and I'll share another screen with you. We're doing a lot of work on these pages, getting them up to date, but and adding, like right now, a big thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a lot more as people are finally willing to get back to looking at the updated standards. So,
Ooh.
Do you see this page? I want to walk you through what's on this particular page. This first thing here where it says click here for professional learning support. This is where we laid out, we put in chunks, and we're saying this is the order we think you should do it. These activities could take 15 to 30 minutes. I mean, if you have a department meeting, a PLC, something that you're working on, this is what we were thinking. These other documents that are in here, those are all part of what you look at when you look at the updated supports. Okay, do you see this now? Does it say how to study updated standards on my screen? Did you go with me on that? I never know if it actually goes to that or not. So what we've got here is, we feel like you need to begin with the intro and the preambles. There was so much information in the Common Core Standards introduction, like 60 pages of introduction, that was really, really helpful that people completely ignored. So we trimmed it down. And we have a short introduction to the ELA standards, and then each one of the strands has a specific introduction we call a preamble that really states the purpose of that strand. And we felt like that, I say we, everybody who worked on reviewing and revising these documents. But so many people felt that the standards were not being implemented with integrity, that they wanted to start with a statement about what the standards really are intended to do. And so that's the intro and the preambles. And we feel like if you skip over those and don't get a firm conceptual understanding of the information in the intro and preambles, then you're doing yourself a disservice. And then the next slide, the next session would be about what the actual revisions are. Some, none, and significant. And I would say, for the most part, there's some or none. Where there's significant standards changes, it's actually not what you would think. So if you haven't seen this document, I am particularly proud of this document. I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to bet you won't see it.
Nothing changed.
It's taken 100 years for this document to open up for some reason. Ah, here we go. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing this screen so I can share another screen. That's what I find to be really weird about. All right, so here's what I did. Just brief explanations, like why did we move language standards to the first position? you open up the standards document, you have to look at language first. And that was intentional. And I'm going to tell you, I probably shouldn't say that's being recorded, but I'm the one that put this document together. So I had some editorial leverage. But, you know, folks went along with me on that one. So the language standards are right up front because you really need to have those in mind as you look at all the rest. Common Core said language standards were never meant to be treated all by themselves. They were meant to be included as braided into all the other content areas. Well, you'll see that not much has changed. You know, they're remaining much the same. So there's still 6 standards. There's still the same 3 categories that they were before. Slight tweaks in the vocabulary expectations. So after you get through the intro and preamble, here's a good place to go. Then you go to speaking and listening. Look at that. 3 standards became 2 because part of that discussion was, well, you know, 2 and 3 sometimes can be kind of hard. If you're in one of those districts where you have to show so much evidence for each one of the standards, these 2 get kind of wonky. So let's just put them together. Let's just put them together so 3 standards become 2. Same thing happened for the next 3 standards. And this variety of context embedded in the updated presentation, speaking and listening standards really is intended to remind you that there's diverse media and formats. Variety of context includes a variety of media and formats. So we've embedded the expectation for technology and media literacies. These 3 foundational skills that were added to the reading standards for 612, most of you are going to be able to skip over these. These are what you look at if students are really, really struggling with reading complex text. You go back and look at these foundational skills to see if they need some intervention instruction. So here with integration of knowledge and ideas, 3 standards were collapsed into 2. And again, this is an attempt to look at the presence of technology, multimedia, multimodal. And here's the thing, this last standard, fluency. The range of reading was moved to the introduction, to the preamble part for reading, and fluency was added instead. Because at middle and high school, we found a lot of teachers weren't really teaching and tracking fluency.
Thank you. Thank you. You heard my cry.
It's a big one, Toby, and that's one I think where we're going to have to put some energy into professional development. But you think about it, when kids get to college, when they get to the workplace, when they take SAT, when they take ASVAB, all of those practices, all of those contexts are measuring fluency. And so we said, it's got to be a K-12 expectation.
Thank you.
Writing is where there's the biggest change. These 3 standards about arguments, expository and narrative text, they're moved out of standards. They're taken out of the document. They're moved to guidance. They're not in rule anymore. Because those were creating checklist practices. So what happened then instead, previous standards, 7, 8, and 9 were research to build and present knowledge. Those were bumped to the front and combined into 1. 3 standards combined into 1, bumped up to the front. This is where you find information. And then the process and production, again, those 3 standards were collapsed into 1. Use information. And then finally, the 3rd one, composing for audience and purpose. this is kind of a retelling of the first three, right? So this one is saying you really have to know your audience and purpose as you prepare your documents. And this means that when you're reading and viewing, you have to really be able to understand the structures and the context, right? So I think this is a helpful document before you start looking at the grade level at the K-12, before you start looking at the specific standards. This is a process, I'll remind you, that I think that we can, as we go forward and we start trying to incorporate some of the ideas that you just identified were good for teachers, good for students, you know, help you get organized, help you be purposeful, help you to build in choice. The updated standards should really help you. So a big question for me, a big takeaway from the study of this text is, you know, what next? What else can we do? You know, we're in March of this very different school year. Looking forward, let's say looking over the next 6 months, looking into summer, and as we start the next school year, what would be helpful? If you know, you had your wish, what would you like me to do? What would you like us to do? What's something that really would be helpful?
I would wonder, I mean, I like this, your new page for getting people to look at the new standards. I wonder if you might run some webinars over summer or something, because like right now, introducing anything at PD, everyone's like, you know, I don't have time. You know, would you create something, some opportunities in summer, or maybe something asynchronous that that people could look at when things quiet down?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if you go back to that PD page I showed you before about how to study the updated standards, there's short videos. I was aiming for 5 to 10 minutes at the outside. Most of them are 5 to 7 minutes. And it would be a brief explanation and then a suggestion for an activity to do, a way to look at those documents with someone. And we always think you should have a partner, a learning partner, someone to look at you with that. And so I think that that's just starting with that, you know, 10 to 15. And that's why I'm saying a half hour would be plenty of time to take a look at one single segment. So I'm looking at Beth, I know one of the biggest changes, and this was across every single content area in the entire learning results. Every single content area had to articulate the standards, each grade, kindergarten through 5, and then once for the 6 through 8 span, once through the 9 through 12 span. So we went from really specific at middle and high school to broad. And so to me, what this means is we have to do a lot of work, not with unpacking the standards to determine what part of it is appropriate for 9th grade, what part of it is appropriate for 12th grade, because they're all appropriate for every grade. But we need to look at the complexity. Sometimes a standard like a 9-12 standard would look one way in 9th grade because you really are reaching a lower level complexity you're using it applied to a lower level complexity of text, and you're assessing it maybe at a lower level of cognitive demand because of the text that you have. So this is where we focus not so much on unpacking and interpreting the specific language of the standards. This is where we really have to turn and look at our instructional practices. This is where we start looking at everything you've just been talking about, structuring over time. you know, in high school, what is a 4-year plan? How do I know that I'm helping students build fluency with complex text and showing that with more complex products? How do we know that it's always getting more complex and more rigorous in its cognitive demand? That's the challenge. And I think that's where we have to go with PD. So that's what I'm hoping to do more over the summer.
My school kind of became a temple of the standards, and we were a pilot at Gray New Gloucester. We were a pilot school way back, and so people developed these matrices, and very few people developed these matrices, and then the other teachers just wanted to get their hands on the matrices and not really understand like why they came about. Like you were saying, skip the preamble. And what do I do? I'm going to use this, and unpacking meant, okay, everybody read this, and not think about it, introduce it, teach it. It was just like, okay, now here's what you're going to do. Now everybody do these activities on the matrix. And so there was a matrix, there were these matrices for each grade level, at least at my school. And so people got into this habit of the ELA teachers got into this habit of, so kids have to do this trick at this grade level and perform this trick at that grade level. It wasn't like a continuum. It wasn't like developing stuff. It was like, check it off, check it off. And so this would mean like subverting that and going back to a more kind of pure kind of continuous development. So that would flip everybody out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wouldn't touch this until next year, but I do think, we are going to have the conversation.
Yeah. I have to be getting ready. I have to have stuff like staged and ready to go. So Wednesday of next week, I have open office hours for ELA at 3:30. And that's where people are invited to come and bring the topic you want to discuss. And we can do breakout rooms or just talk like this if we need, just an unstructured conversation for ELA in general. So it's just open office hour, and I'm going to do that each month at different times. I have found setting aside one specific time doesn't necessarily work. So I'll look at my calendar each month and choose a different time, a different day, different time, whatever I can do to give more people a chance to step in for ELA office hours. The other thing is I'm going to lean into doing more PD relative to the standards, but I'm going to be looking at feedback from you about this experience and thinking about, this has been an extraordinary year. As we look at embracing the updated standards, what are these practices we're going to take from this past year that we want to make sure we hold on to? And you've named several, I think, that are really helpful. All right, it's 4:30. Is there anything else? Anybody have any questions or suggestions? And Beth, I think there's a lot more conversation to be had. It broke my heart to have to move to these broad spans, but at the same time, it puts a lot more power in the teacher's hands. All right, folks, I have to say, I do believe the wind has significantly decreased. I mean, it woke me up during the night, shaking my house. So I'm really happy. I think that it has slowed down. So maybe there's a chance to get out and go for a walk while the sun is still shining. Cheryl had a snow day. Wow. Yeah, I think there were lots of places that had no power too. Whiteout conditions. Wow. Well, listen, spring is right around the corner. Almost here. All right, as always, any questions, any suggestions, send them to me anytime. I love hearing from you, and I would, yeah, visible learning, of course, is my passion, and we'll swing back to that for sure, because I have to say there's a lot more conversation about visible learning practices. I'm thrilled about that. So we'll definitely pick that up again. But right now is the time for me to start looking at the next 6 months and how I support you. So any ideas that you have, any suggestions, let me know, and I'll do my best to bring that to you. All right, everybody. Thanks for
Thanks,
coming.
Morgan.
Take care.